I'm Irina Chismas, the marketing at Castify, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Today, we are talking about customer success in startups. And I think it's only fair to say startup CS doesn't behave like CS in more mature companies. The environment is more volatile. The signals are weaker, roles blur faster, and somehow decisions tend to stick longer before anyone realizes they were. I'm not the expert in the room, but my guests for sure are. And today I'm joined by Kourtney Thomas, head of customer success at TakeUp, and Katherine Tattum, founder and principal at Inside Health Tech. Courtney, Catherine, welcome. And thank you for saying yes and taking the time to share your experiences with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be here.
I think both of you have built and operated customer success in environments where things were still forming. Product, ownership, systems, expectations, you name it. And I think you agree that customer success in startup is a different game. And honestly, I think CS strategies should be divided into two buckets: startup environment and pretty much everything else. And today we tackle the first bucket. And I want to give a bit of context to the audience who is joining us online. At Castify, we work with CS teams at very different stages, from early startup teams to more mature organizations. And one pattern we keep seeing is that many CS problems aren't caused by bad execution, but by applying the right ideas in the wrong environment or maybe too early. And a lot of what we've learned comes from watching teams try to create structured program visibility before they do have some strong signals, and from helping them gradually move from chaos to clarity as the company evolves. That's why conversation like this matter to us, not because there's one right way to do CS, but because context changes everything. And today we're going to talk about understanding the environment you are operating in and making more deliberate choices with those constraints that you have. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we start. The session is being recorded, so you'll get access to the replay. I know that's the number one question that I always get. If you have questions, drop them in the chat in the Q&A tab. I'll make sure that your questions end up on the screen for both Catherine and Courtney. We'll save the time for them in a dedicated Q&A sessions. If by all means we end up with some time constraints, no worries. We'll for sure answer and tackle it offline. Now, to get this session started, I want to understand who is with us online as now, and I want to publish a poll and invite you to tell us more about the environment that you guys are operating in. Give me 1 sec to basically publish the poll because I want to understand if basically you guys are in a startup, you are in a mid-sized company, or maybe we also have, I don't know, people who join us from bigger teams, from corporations. It doesn't matter, but did the poll appear? Did it appear? Courtney, I think you are muted. Catherine? No, okay, perfect. I don't know why. No, okay. What's this? I don't. Okay. Submit. Oh, submit. Okay. Now I see. Now I also see it. Okay. And I think. Okay. Don't be shy. We'll give it 1 minute for you to basically vote. But I think 70% of the audience is basically in early stage startups. So that's. We'll wait. I would say a few more seconds. But I think this basically proves that you guys are operating in environments where CS expectations are very high and structure and clarity are still forming. And is this is exactly the topic that we will start discussing. And without further ado, Courtney, I want to start with the following scenario. Let's assume that you start on Monday as a first time head of CS in a 20-ish person startup. What are the first things that you do in your first month, and what do you intentionally not touch? So what you do and what you don't do when you work in a CS startup.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things. The first thing that I do is talk to every single person internally. It's a 20-person startup. You have time and capacity to do this. It is well worth it. And this is really just, of course, getting to know people, but also listening to them. Like, what are their pain points? What are the kind of cross functional things that are happening? Getting to understand, like, how people are operating at all different levels, like how things are going to connect. And also, like, we're in customer success. So we're building relationships. Like, that is going to be very important internally, especially for a small company. That's pretty much the top thing. First 30 days, shadowing customer calls. And I specifically say shadowing because listening only, same type of approach. Let your CSMs or whoever's customer facing, you might be joining, and it might be that the founder is the one still talking to customers, or an account manager or a salesperson is a customer contact. Just joining those calls to observe and see where things stand today can be really enlightening to just understand where things are today. And that's it. Toward the end of the first month, something that I think can be really incredibly helpful is to do the job for a week. Again, sit with someone, who has been taking care of customers and understand what are their day-to-day tasks, what tools are they using, how are they doing it, how are they spending their time, and then take over for a week, or to the level that you can without disrupting the customer experience. Like, just get your hands onto things and get your hands dirty a little bit. It really changes the game, other than just, I think this is what's happening, or this is what you should be doing, but that's really not it. And especially in a virtual environment, or if it's a all remote workplace, like, you don't know until. Those are three big things for me in the first month or so. And then intentionally, honestly, not touching a single thing as far as systems or processes go, because, like, you really do have to understand, like, what's going on and evaluate and understand before jumping in and, wow, we can optimize this, or we can totally do this right away. No, it deserves a little bit more time than you think, even if you see a lot of opportunity. Like, just waiting a minute can actually set up for better success.
Oh, so you are building the strategy for day one where you come up with a whole. Okay. I think not touching is the hard part, and where people are a bit uncomfortable because there's a lot of pressure and you tend to prove and you go into basically proving. And that's the moment when you are no longer, I don't know, taking the time to absorb. I really like that not touching part. Catherine, what are the things that early CS leaders tend to
Mhm.
do that feels right at the time but causes problems later?
Great question. So the thing probably is that they think they've won when the sale is made, right? They think that's the win. And they confuse that contract, if you will, with the change management that needs to happen, the behavior change that needs to happen. We're all guilty of thinking our products are great and thinking our customers are obviously going to think our products are great too. And so focusing more on who the users are, why they have bought your product, what they're trying to get out of it, and what they're going to need to change to actually start using that product is really important. So if you don't invest in that piece of it, most likely they're not going to make the uncomfortable behavior change that they're going to need to make. I think I've had one product in my entire career where the users were actively excited about taking it on. Most of the time, they're trying to do their job, and your product is something they have to use along the way, whether they like it or not. And so the more you can meet them where they are, understand their objectives, and help them change their behavior over those first few months, the more likely you are to succeed in the long term.
I think this very well connects with one of the things that I often see, I would say recommended or recommended on group Slacks, on Dean groups, do customer interviews. I'm not sure if this is what you are actually referring, but I'm curious how many, if those were the things, so run those customer interviews, and how many did you guys actually do, and how do you choose with whom to speak? And if you and do you do those customer interviews regardless of the model, B2B, B2C? What's the thing? Because it ties up with what
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah. So I wasn't really talking about customer interviews. I was focusing on the customer's journey rather than my own.
Okay.
But you're right. If I was focusing on my own journey, to add on to what Kourtney was talking about before, and I was sitting listening to her and going, yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. She went through. Absolutely. Throughout your interaction, throughout your journey with that company, you want to be talking to customers regularly for whatever reason. And if you have no good reason to be talking to them, then an interview is the right thing. But I think it's when I was talking, I was thinking specifically about how do I make sure those customers are successful.
We'll discuss about user journey because it's the second thing that I see often recommended. But remaining on the dialogue of customer interviews, Kourtney, do you prioritize them early in the early days, or is it something that it's a must do when in a startup environment to be able to stay close and react fast?
So I'll say to that end, I don't believe that anything is a must do. Everything, to your point, is so context driven, depending on your customer, your company, your stage, exactly where you're at. Like it's more so the must is having good discernment and good judgment to understand what's necessary for you. But the way that I think about it is less like you have to be doing customer interviews and more like you do have to find ways to stay close to the customer, like as necessary, right? As a leader, it can sometimes, especially as you get a little further down the road and like you do start to establish maturity and things like that, like it can be very easy to get more distant, like from the customers themselves, making that conscious effort to, again, whether it's you talk to them early on in that shadow call, and now it's like, hey, I just haven't seen you in a while. Wanted to hop on this call. No agenda. And maybe something comes up organically. Like you can structure it however you need to. I'll say at TakeUp, when I joined, I had lots of wonderful intent to do a set of customer interviews across different parts of the base and things like that. My situation did not end up like that, which again is like startup life. I ended up losing somebody within 2 weeks. I had to like basically jump into the role. Like it was a whole thing. But effectively, like I spent time with about 2/3 of our customer base in a very real way, very early on within the first 60 days. So it was a mix of timing of like regular cadence calls, escalation calls, different things like that, and a good cross section of customers. Within that, I was able to effectively like get to the same place of had I done more formal customer interviews with a set of questions or things like that, I was able to listen for patterns, right? What were they bringing up organically on, again, regular cadence calls or maybe something more heated or onboarding, early onboardings, either positive or negative about the experience, the product. And I'm listening to for questions and like also then digging into like, where is this question coming from? What are maybe gaps in experience or expectations or value throughout the life cycle? And that helps me see where I can get to work. Or again, like what are the things that we can double down on that they are telling us essentially in these calls? All of that to say formal customer interviews can be fantastic. And like definitely if you have the capacity to do it, but just staying connected to the customer, that's the real key.
If I may, something I'd add on to that, and it's perhaps a little specific to the industry that I'm in. So I'm in health technology. And one of the challenges for technology companies is working in healthcare is most of their staff are young people. Your average 20, 30, 35-year-old hasn't been to the hospitals, never been to a retirement home, has never really been seriously sick, has never had been in an operating room, none of those things. And so one of the things a lot of the companies that I work with have done have actually brought their staff into the customer setting. So it's not an interview, but it's exposing the staff so they really understand what their customer's experience is, not just their tool, but what's their day like. And the strongest experience I had, for example, was actually going to a skilled nursing facility where the patients are old and infirm, and it's a completely different experience than any other healthcare environment I've been in. And I'm sure retail, hospitality, all sorts of other environments where it's just not the experience of the staff who work there, be they in CS, in product, in development, and anything else. And it just brings a whole appreciation for the experience of your customers' lives and how unimportant your tool really is to them.
Is it fair to summarize that this is less about collecting the input and is more about deciding what to trust, understanding, and basically forming the foundation for what at some point you're gonna build? And
Exactly. Yeah. But it's also, to Kourtney's point, understanding their context, understanding where they're coming from, and understanding that what seems reasonable to you when you're sitting in your nice quiet desk with a comfortable chair and a this, that, and the other, and a nice big screen on your desktop, it's completely different from their lived experience of they're standing at a counter with a tiny screen and a customer yelling at them. Those worlds are entirely different. So you can only really appreciate that when you see it for yourself.
I wanna pick on what you said about the building the journeys. And since you mentioned it, Catherine, I wanna ask you, when does building a journey map, user journey map, brings clarity, and when is it more confusing? How do you decide, speaking about context and putting everything in a context, how do you
Mm.
decide, would this help me or not?
Journey maps, I see them, they're primarily a communication tool or a decision tool. So they're especially useful when you have some real customer evidence and you can map the top 2 or 3 moments that are driving adoption. And you can identify, you can assign an owner for each sort of phase, each stage of adoption. You can clarify how value is delivered and what value is expected to be delivered through those moments, and but more importantly, get agreement across the team. Map journeys, they help you spot patterns and gaps as the biggest things, as well as clarifying any roles or misunderstandings. They do become false progress, though, when it's aspirational. If you don't have a lot of customers yet, your journey is not going to be consistent. It's not worth investing a lot of time in it. It becomes false progress as well when people start arguing over the colors of the shapes or whatever. You're focusing on the details and not the big picture. That's what the journey really gives you, is that big picture. But the most important thing is you actually change something as a result. If the map doesn't change what someone does next week, then it's not a map, it's morale activity, which has its place, but isn't really valuable.
Courtney, I'm curious, is the user journey something that is industry agnostic? Do you also consider doing it in hospitality?
Yeah, first of all, I also was actively nodding along with Catherine's
Mhm.
assessment here on journey mapping. I think it's definitely relevant. Again, like those
Mhm.
clear points of adoption and value and decision making, that's huge. It's also something that, again, I probably took 6 months to like rebuild and envision like what our journey map looked like, and then communicated that to the team. And it was interesting because I came in and it was like they had this whole map, and I spent, again, 3-4 months really close to it. And I was like, no, like this isn't it at all. It was very aspirational and it wasn't realistic to the customers and what we were doing and what they were experiencing. Yeah, it can be a great tool, but it has to be functional and realistic to your business and your customer for sure.
Okay. And what I understand from what you said is that it's a process that it takes time. And it's not something that you build first of all alone. I assume that it takes the whole alignment with other functions into the organization, and you don't build it in 1 week. So you don't come, you build it, and then okay, it's set in stone. I feel like it's a living thing. It's a living process, and you need to revisit that and see if it's relevant. So
Absolutely.
yeah, go on, Catherine.
No, I was just saying, absolutely. I think you're right. And it can be that revisit can be just periodic. We haven't looked at this in 6 months, 12 months. What has changed? And in startups, especially where your customer base might be evolving, your product and its offerings might be evolving, and your capabilities are evolving. That's when it becomes really important to come back to it somewhat periodically just to see where things stand.
We we tackled customer interviews that are recommended. We discussed about user journey. Now I want to discuss about the data that it's actually worth tracking and what metrics tend to create false confidence in a startup environment. Catherine, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, every product is different. So you've got to thinking about this very generally. There's three things really that matter in those first crucial 90 days. Because I always think of that as by 90 days, they've usually set their pattern, whether they're on track to renew or they're not. And so the first thing is, have you achieved some kind of activation milestone? Like this is probably the thing that's the most different one product to the next, one customer to the next. There may even be different ones for different roles within each company, that some users will have very specific things they're trying to achieve, and have they achieved those things? And are they activated on the product? Are they starting to adopt the product? The second is the breadth and depth of adoption. A lot of startups have fairly simple products, so it's not that complex a question. But if you have different user types and different functionalities for those different user types, then it's not just is one user or are the core users really happy, but is everyone really happy? How across the entire user population have they adopted your product, or is it just one champion that is doing really well and it's very positive? The last is a kind of a friction signal, and there's a happy medium. If you had no support calls, you have a problem. I don't know any startup product that's so good that no one ever needs help with it. So that's the one end of the spectrum. And obviously the other end of the spectrum, if people are struggling too much, then that's too much too. And again, you don't know what that number is per user or per customer. You've got to run through some before you know what those numbers are, but you do have to have some kind of volume that you expect from every site, and whether or not a particular site is on track or not. And just thinking about the metrics that create false confidence, how many logins do you have, or daily active users? Those are things that product managers like to watch because it tells them there's a start. But for true behavior change, the fact that somebody logs in doesn't really tell you much. It's whether they're doing the thing that they're going to do to get value from your system. That's really what matters.
And when you don't have clean data, but you still have to take decisions.
Yeah, no, that's hard. That's the hardest part. Also, I'll let Kourtney answer that one.
I'm sure we both have valuable insights there. Well, so I'll say for me, early on anyway, time and manual work had been a good guide. Like scale is the goal, right? You're always keeping big picture strategy in mind, but then also what's the low hanging fruit? Like what am I seeing trending wise that I can make some decisions on that will move us in the right direction? So signals typically for me, when it's not clean or there's not a lot of data, that also can be a thing if you're just not set up for it yet or whatever. But like where are my CSMs like spending a lot of time, and like what we know, even without again a lot of quantifying data, like we just know it's too much time. What tickets and bugs keep coming up, to your point of what are the patterns there, what are those numbers for you? And then to like what kind of general customer profile tracks across those things, if there are any kind of segments that you can see, or again, what's the persona that might be hitting a few of these different things. Those have helped me discern in like next steps in a lot of cases. Again, even if it's not always like super clean or not easy to aggregate and pull into a spreadsheet from the CRM or whatever, a lot of times you can still see where this is coming from. It looks again to me like repeated questions, not just the loudest complaints, where the CS team is like doing heroics, right? Like where they're just firefighting and saving everything, where their energy gets drained disproportionately too. And with that, again, like I I don't wait for like full confidence in all of that, or again, like being able to aggregate the data in some way, because you just can't. You kind of just have to wait for some alignment, or I think about it as like a combination of between my gut, my team's experience, and what customers keep bumping into. And then that starts to guide decision making.
Courtney, I want to put on of what you said. And Fred was asked, we have a question on the chat. What's a good way to understand the outcome value? I feel like it's really to this topic, to metrics, data, and measuring. It's on the chat. So he asked, what's a good way to understand that outcome value?
I guess I'm not fully connecting with that. Catherine, you have any insights there? If the question was
Fred is typing, so we'll let him offer more context. I wanna remain on the data part, and I wanna correlate it with what you said with what are the things that you shouldn't do in the first month. How much time do you spend on data and on trying to connect the data points at the beginning, not necessarily in the first month, but at the very beginning? How do you calibrate? How do you balance this part?
So when I think about it in the beginning, for me, again, we had not a lot of data in general. And then what we did have was all over the place. So I spent some time high level thinking like, okay, these are the very basic things that I am going to need. Like I do need better churn tracking and trends. And again, like personas and like all of that, just like none of that was happening. Like there was just no CRM hygiene, like nothing like that. I connected with our product designer around some let's align. Okay, I was able to get a ballpark of here are some good users, here are some poor users. Let's connect that to any trends again with like user engagement behavior. So it was like very high level to start. I'll say I'm like 9 months in here and I'm finally like this week, like this month, I've been doing a lot more like deep dive analysis because the data is finally in a place to where I can say, okay, now we can really look at like more granular and more like down at the granular level that connects to the big picture of strategy. Here are the glaring things that we know we want to work on across teams or different things like that. So in the beginning, I feel like for me, like there wasn't a lot of like data that I was looking at. It was more like understanding what do I need? How do I set that up quickly, like quick and dirty if I can, and then continuing to build that out. And it was some internal behavior change too, to be honest, and change management there of like my own team of, hey guys, like we have to operate in this way. So I know it's a pain in the butt, but you got to spend an hour a week on your CRM hygiene. Sorry, this is non-negotiable. And then across the product team and different things like that too. And then now we're getting to a place to where it's set up a little bit better. We got somebody in ops more that's doing more BI for us and like dashboards and things like that. But in the beginning, it was like understanding we don't have anything. So what do we need? How do we do that fast? And then we can improve upon it as we go. And now it's in a better place. That's a little like nerdy exciting to be able to see more there.
I really like that you basically painted the reality that we often see. And now I'm curious, how did you set up expectations for your boss? And I usually know that the C-level people, and not only are super keen to find numbers, to work with numbers, but and you don't have it, and you need to have the time to build it. And as you mentioned, you know what? It took me 9 months. How did you talk to your boss about not having the numbers? And for 9 months, how did you buy some time for you to be able to build that part?
I'm just pretty direct in setting those expectations. And again, like luckily, like I know it was the theoretical scenario, but I work for a 20-person company. So like we're all very close. Like the leadership team is like we're all here together. I was able to have a conversation about none of this exists. So I'm working on it, but just understand I'm gonna use what I have, but it's gonna take some building. And he also came in and was like, ooh, like we don't have a lot. So I think, and of course that's part of why I was brought in. So he knew where we were at, which I'm definitely lucky in that sense. But also providing what I could with what I had all along the way was the way to your point, like to buy some time, right? So this is incomplete data, and just giving that summary of this is incomplete data. Here's what we have. Here's what we don't have. But also here is, again, the signal, the early signal that we're seeing. So let's talk about that. Let's use that. And we're continuing to ingest and collect data that will make this signal richer along the way. And then again, as we got in more operations and stuff like that, or like very early on communicating with her, like, hey, this is what I need you to set up. This is what we're going to need. And like just staying close to her along the way has like fast tracked that then.
Before we move to the next topic, Fred, okay, you clarified, and it was my mistake. He was referring to something that Catherine said, so we'll pick it up. But speaking on the metrics, Carly asked us about some metrics you think are the most crucial to be tracking. Obviously, different based on the product, but curious, what's your take? And I wanted to ask you, can we give some concrete examples of metrics, Kourtney, from your side and from Catherine's side? Because it's good that you serve two different industries, two different type of products. So Carly can have two different views on this. What are the things that are important in the setup and in the environment that you guys are operating?
Catherine, do you want to jump in? I've been talking a lot. I can
Yeah,
go.
sure. So it is very specific to the product, absolutely, and different for the users. So I'll give an example. I was recently working with a company that did a scribe specifically for the medical community. And the patterns we were seeing were very different for the type of clinician. So if it was a doctor, and if it was a doctor, like a family doctor, a general practitioner, they have short appointments. They have 20 to 40 appointments a day, 5 to 15 minutes long, tick, 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 tick. It's a very specific pattern compared to a therapist, for example, who will have 5 or 6 appointments a day, each an hour long. It's a completely different engagement pattern. And so you really need to start learning what your user base is like. And when you're starting, and the point, you don't necessarily have that data. One of the tactics I have found very useful is to actually have the CS team, the people who are speaking to customers on a daily basis, to provide qualitative feedback and information when we do not have that quantitative feedback. But whatever quantitative feedback you can get, obviously you want to include.
I'm going to stay on you, Catherine, because you mentioned quantitative and qualitative metrics, and ask how do you measure if they are actually achieving the outcome they bought the product for?
That's hard. It can be very difficult because sometimes it is qualitative, the outcome is rather than. And so the danger is that you are focusing on a feature in SaaS, you're focusing on a feature of your product, but that's not actually what is delivering value. And so you have to find a middle ground. So is it the feature that they get to use a particular feature? Is it a chain of events, a path through your application that is the indicator of success? Is it that they are using a particular feature regularly enough? So those can be very difficult to identify and very difficult to track. And so you just, to Kourtney's point, you need to do the best you can. And in terms of building out that instrumentation, the way I have found most effective to think about it is tying it to revenue. What is going to give us insight into retaining our revenue and knowing where we are likely to expand? That both gives you the metrics you are looking for to succeed in your own job, but also gives you the argument that you will need to convince the executive to invest in the instrumentation that you require.
If I may, Catherine, I want to build on what you said. Indeed, it's very hard to basically come up with a definition of how does it look a successful user from my point. And in previous organizations, more product led that I used to work, it was a common effort between the marketing, the sales. So all the function needed to have a joint definition of what does it mean, what does it take. And it was okay. We started it speaking about, I think it was an exercise that it took us 3 or 4 months. We ended up with a definition of how do we measure an onboarded users, what's the definition of onboarding in our case, and we tweaked it because it wasn't perfect, and we tweaked it because of the user journey, because of the constraints that we had in terms of tracking, because we wanted it to basically build an ideal onboarding definition, but we didn't have the leverage. So we basically had to scrape things and we iterated on it. So yeah, it's hard to have it from the very beginning, and plus it's not one team effort, because then it comes if you have a definition of how success look like in CS, if product has another one, it's not ideal. And I noticed that alignment it's the hardest thing. Even in small teams, in bigger teams, alignment is hard to reach.
Absolutely. Alignment is so important that you all need to be chasing the same definition of success. If you don't have that, then you are going to be pulling each other in wrong directions. And I think especially as your company matures a little bit, each team will have sub-objectives, if you will. So the product team may be looking to see what else users do. They may be looking for different sort of areas to grow in, but you do need that one North Star that everyone agrees is the definition of success for across the board.
I want to make things a bit uncomfortable for you both. And I want to discuss about money, people, and asking for more. Usually the things that we are afraid to tackle. And it ties nice with the data, because usually when you have the data and when you have the reports, this brings the confidence and leverage to ask for budget. Courtney, I want to ask you, as head of CS in a startup, how do you build your first CS budget? And what are the first things actually worth investing in?
Yeah. For me, I started early on with the capacity model, which again is like that first 30 days of spending time with everybody, doing the job, like really getting a sense of where things are. I run it up, here's where it is today, here's where I know I can improve. And that's a good starting point for buy-in and leverage then with my leadership, with my CEO and our finance team. So from there, then I align that with what's the strategy for the next quarter, and then what's our overall yearly strategy. So what are the high level company objectives? How are CS objectives laddering up to that? And then again, we keep talking about what are the metrics and everything, like what are we expected to achieve, but then what goes into that on the ground in order to make it happen. So it's backing into it, right? What's going to help us be more consistent with our delivery and our customer outcomes. So if there's initiatives around, we need to upskill the team on becoming more commercial. Okay, great. Then we need budget for training. We're going to need to invest there. Or if we're focused on capacity and scale of CSM time, great. Then we're going to need money in the budget for AI, for tooling, for things like that we know are going to achieve that goal. To me, early things worth investing in, and this is probably different a little bit for each company and each leader too, but I do think team culture and training is a worthwhile investment if you can gain the buy-in for that. Katherine talked about customer visits. That's at the top of my list. Like she said, like inserting yourself into their environment will pay dividends beyond what is imaginable. And then having a process around that so that the budget like makes sense. So you can control the budget with it. It's not just like willy-nilly we go and like we spend $10,000 just to do one customer visit for 2 days. I think budgeting, like selecting the tools that are actually going to move the needle for you. You don't need to have all of the things when, as Katherine has mentioned, maybe you don't have that many customers. You don't really need this whole thing yet. That's too big of an investment. So again, being discerning about where the stage you're at and what you really need. And I think this is the answer that is probably somewhat controversial, but I do think initial investment in headcount does matter. And if you can get somebody like senior in, that can be a really good investment. That helps to move things quicker, that you can depend on, work with, things like that. Really like getting your foundation really solid with a reasonable amount of people, and then optimize in other ways. Really like overall, and we already talked about this, like the biggest thing that I've learned with budget is like, it's about proving leverage and proving your judgment as a leader. You're not asking for the world. You know exactly why you're asking and what leverage that's going to unlock for the team and for the company. So like when you can showcase your judgment as far as investment and return goes, like you're going to get all the budget you ever ask for. You just need to show up with that backing.
Yeah, it is the ROI. She's absolutely right. It's the ROI that's the most important part of that conversation. Yes, this is going to require an upfront investment of this. However, it's going to pay off for us in this time frame in this way.
Courtney, I really the fact that you mentioned that it's important to have the foundation right. I remember that at some point, once you I used to work, told me when you are at zero, operate as if you would when you have no revenue, build the foundation and the structure that you would want to have at 1 million. When you are at 1 million, operate and have everything as at 10 million. And I think that we compromised, I would say, were not necessarily compromised, but we go on cutting corners and trying to do scrappy work, even when it comes to hiring or not the right calls, because we are constrained. We were gonna talk about how, and I'm gonna ask you to teach the audience how to cheat. But later on, I second what you said. I think it's important to have senior people with experience from the very beginning because they help you build the right foundation and then you can expand. Plus, I think also in startup it's important to have senior people because you don't have a lot of time and you need to move fast. They juniors or mid people don't have the time to basically learn and to grow. They are basically thrown in the battle, and I would say it's not necessarily fair. So yeah, I think it's important, especially in startups, to have senior people with experience who have done it to basically save some time. And speaking about, okay, scaling and not necessarily moving from the resource of money from the budget into, okay, the people part. Let's also talk about, Catherine, when do you decide to hire? How do you what's the signal that it's time, working hard is no longer.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I look for. And I think of really thinking about this as revenue defense. How do you make sure that you retain the customers you have and then are able to build from that foundation? So there's the first is when people are consistently dropping core objectives or core activities rather that protect retention. Proactive risk checks, making sure you're following through on onboarding, taking the time to understand how a particular customer organization is performing, and then also preparing for renewals early. That kind of activity is really important and it does take time and it doesn't involve necessarily talking to customers. So you need time in your day to be able to do those kinds of things. The second is when support and implementation load is forcing you to be permanently reactive. It is really cutting into the time for everything else. That's another thing. You do have to have, to Kourtney's point, some idea of how much your team can handle, how many customers, how many users. You do have to have some sense. And even if you don't have the prettiest data, you can just say, you can come up with some assumptions, state your assumptions, and then test them after a while and see how that's progressing. And so you can start to use that. Okay, now we have this number of users. So far, we've only been able to handle that number of users with so not more people. It's time to increase. It's time to add. It's time to do whatever. The bad signs, I guess, is just everyone saying, oh, I'm busy, without really understanding where their time is going. You do have to make some investment to know where the time is going and where people are spending their time before you just blindly hire more people.
Let's teach the audience how to cheat a little. Where do you consciously cut corners? How exactly do you do it? And the most important, why does it work in that particular context? Because it's not only about the tactic. I want to make your thinking visible for the others, as you earlier mentioned, to understand how does this apply to them. So let's give a few examples of when and how you can cut corner consciously.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this actually, and one of the places, the easiest way to answer that question is to start with, there are some things that are absolutely non-negotiable. That is very different by industry. So for example, in health technology, privacy and data privacy is very important and cannot be touched. And so that gives you some constraints and it gives you some guardrails into which you need to be operating. And that's helpful. Knowing where you cannot cut corners is a great start. But the first place always with startups is tooling. I've seen these wonderful systems that help account managers plan out their accounts and understand performance. And I love the idea of them, but they've never actually gotten to use one because they're so expensive. And when you're small, when you're a startup, you've got a small number of customers. There's this wonderful thing called Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, and we live in it. And what's great about those is, especially early stage, where you are changing your systems every few months. And by systems, I mean your approach, your processes, the way you're dealing with your customers. Your product is changing, your staff is changing, everything's changing. If you are investing in something that's a big, heavy SaaS tool, you're going to struggle. But actually having everything in a spreadsheet can be really helpful. So that's easy does the first thing you can cut corners on. Kourtney, what would you add to the list?
Yeah, wholeheartly agree with that last one. It's something that I think it's really easy, like in our industry, to be like, oh man, like we need like a CSP immediately. And no, you don't. You've got 100 customers. Put it in a Google Sheet. It's fine. So I love that you said that because sometimes I feel like the only one there as well. So we're not. And for anybody on this call who is using a lot of Google Sheets, like you're right where you need to be. So I would just plus one that for sure. Like use what you have is like a big kind of cheat code for me. There are a lot of ways that you can make things work. And there are a lot of things that you can ask your preferred LLM of, hey, here's what I have. Here's what I'm trying to achieve. Help me figure out how to do that with what I have right now. And here's what my next step would be. But you can go surprisingly far with whatever you have existing before it actually starts to break. And then you're gonna be thinking through what the next steps are. Arena, like you mentioned, if you're at 1 million, you're thinking about 3 to 5 million. You're already thinking about this. So you'll be able to think about that next step. But like do what you can with what you have. Like it'll work for quite a while. I think something for me too, a couple of things that come to mind is, again, you know what's best for your org, and like just not falling into the trap of you have to do X, Y, and Z. To Catherine's point, you will know what's non-negotiable for your business. But like sometimes getting past more formal structure that's templates and whatever that's set up for like enterprise level companies, like skip past most of that. It's how you're going to move fast and with velocity, right? Know exactly where you're trying to get, and then you can move fast. You don't want to just move fast and break stuff, but you also don't need to insert unnecessary steps and like complexity that you don't need. And then I think something for me too is what do we stop doing? Like it's that exercise of start, stop, continue. But I actually just shared this as like in our January board meeting of kind of our 2025 evaluation was like, what did we stop doing in order to scale? There are things that might be existing when you come in or whatever. And this doesn't make any sense. Just because it's how we've been doing it doesn't mean we have to continue doing it. So that too can take you a few steps down the road if you are evaluating like, hey, like what can we actually set aside in favor of spending our time and energy differently?
I want to take the question that we have from Fred, and then I'm going to ask you one more question because we only have 6 more minutes. Fred, yeah, time passes. Fred asked, are you segmenting your customers, and in which dimensions and parameters did you segment on? Do you want to both take this and explain how does this apply to your product? Let's see if it's different based on industry or type of customer.
Yeah, I think we'll both take it because we'll both have very different perspectives. One thing I think that almost always comes up is revenue and revenue potential. And that how much the revenue potential will matter will depend on how much expansion is in scope for the CS role, because companies organize themselves a little bit differently. So that's the biggest thing. But usually for a lot of the companies I've worked for, because the workflows are different in different clinical environments, there's some indication of the type of organization matters too. Kourtney, what about you? What have you seen?
Yeah, for context, my company is solely focused on SMB. So we are not, and that's a high level. Our parent company builds AI-driven solutions for small and medium businesses. That is the mandate. That is the like what every company in that portfolio is what we do. So Even within that though, understanding like there's like micro SMB, there's SMB, there's a little bit bigger. So it acts in a way as by size and stage. I will say that's context, but I will say my answer is we haven't segmented yet because it just didn't make sense. We actually pretty much all customers fall in the same bucket revenue wise. There isn't a lot of expansion potential because currently our product is a point solution. We don't really have a platform play. We don't really have a big upsell. And actually, a lot of people come in that are like higher service tier. So we don't really have anywhere to go from there. So there wasn't really an opportunity for revenue segmentation. We're just getting to the point to where we are shifting ICPs. So it's like on my list again for like February of, okay, we can start to segment now, but I need to define those dimensions and parameters very clearly as we start to do. I can see where it's going, but not formally yet because there wasn't a need. Everybody's handling the same customer ultimately. As Katherine said, like super depends on the product and what it all looks like.
We have another question from Rachel, and I'm gonna delete my question because we don't have time to tackle it. Rachel is saying, I'm a CS coordinator who is learning CS while at the same time helping to build our CS function. We are about to roll out our platform that is hardware enabled SaaS. That's a hard one. What should I be trying to put in place now? When do I raise my hand for outside help, like a consultant or maybe expert coming in?
Ooh,
So it's
that's
not a
hard.
native SaaS, and that's a hard one. It's a combination hardware enabled SaaS. I can tell you, Rachel, that I'm thinking of building my next webinar about non-SaaS native products because it's a different thing as well there. Let's see. But with the information that we have up until now, so she is basically trying to build a function while learning, and it also has a hard setup.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that comes to mind is, especially because you're just starting with the product as well, probably no one even knows what it is you're going to be watching for success. You've got to start making some guesses about what success will look like for your customers. And the best way to do that is by talking to them. So as you get those early customers, to be engaging with them, to understand what is it that what's going to happen that they'll know they're successful, so that you know what to look for in the first instance. But to start with, oh my goodness, if just rolling out the platform, that's an exciting time for sure. The place to start, I think, is to start thinking about how are you going to get people started? What is it they're going to do in when they first sign up, their first minute, their first hour, their first day, their first week? And just get that started. And you'll be wrong. Just to be clear, you'll be wrong. But it's a place to start. Then you talk with customers, see what happens, course correct, and off you go. What would you add to that, Kourtney?
I would add to the kind of second part of that question of like, when do I raise my hand for outside help? Similar to how we were talking about budget, I would do it early as long as you like put together a pitch for what's going to be the ROI on this investment. If we spend X amount of dollars for X amount of limited engagement time on this expert, here's how much further it's going to get us down the line. Or here's where we don't have the expertise to do this. Here's where this person does. And that will accelerate, again, like our velocity in this rollout in this way. That will affect X amount of revenue for new customers or retention or whatever it might be. But I would advocate, like, if you're already feeling that, it's probably like time to start to put together the proposal, just because it'll, again, accelerate stuff. And the expectation is always like, how fast can you go in a startup? It's going to help you. It's worth it.
Kourtney, Catherine, thank you so much for sharing what actually works and what actually doesn't when you are building CS in a startup environment. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and to share your experience so openly. I want to thank you to everyone who joined us live for the great questions and for being part of the conversation. I really like when people are chatting behind our backs and are giving advices. So thanks for doing that. We'll make sure you get the recording shortly, and I'll be back with my next webinar in the first weeks of March, continuing this series of practical, I hope, conversation around customer success. Until then, take care and thanks again for spending the hour with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.